Welcome to Middle East Briefing. The content of the briefing includes: Palestine national team train amid constant feeling of anxiety. Germany's diplomacy reaches its limits in the Middle East. Tough choices for Israel in US's Middle East vision. A wider war doesn't suit Iran, even as it benefits from rising tensions. UN warns Gaza is heading for famine as specter of wider war looms. Palestine national team train amid constant feeling of anxiety. Al Jazeera. The Palestine national football team begins its 2024 Asian Cup campaign in Qatar against Iran on Sunday. However, preparations for the 23-man squad have been overshadowed by the war in Gaza. The team left the West Bank overland for Jordan ahead of two 2026 World Cup qualifiers against Lebanon and Australia, but has been unable to return to the West Bank since. They can't be sure they would be allowed out again due to the tightening of Israeli forces' movement restrictions on Palestinians. The players have been unable to return to the West Bank since then, and have stayed together as the conflict has worsened, touching every player, coach and official. The players have a constant feeling of anxiety for their families. Stricter movement restrictions and checkpoints mean the West Bank League has been suspended after only a few games, while both the Palestinian Olympic and Football Association headquarters in Gaza have been destroyed. In previous wars in Gaza, football infrastructure, especially stadiums, has been targeted by Israel. FIFA and the Asian Football Confederation, AFC, have not commented on the heavily damaged Yarmouk Stadium in Gaza City being used to house hundreds of Palestinian prisoners, many of whom appeared to be children. Susan Shulaby, vice president of the Palestinian Football Association, PFA, believes FIFA and the AFC are not doing anything to help, and that there is a double standard. She says FIFA responded swiftly to Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine by barring Russian football teams. Rami Hamadi, the Palestine goalkeeper, is not sure what he will return to. He was born in the Israeli city of Shifa Amar and made history by becoming the first active player in the Israeli Premier League to play for the Palestinian national team. He does not know when the league will restart, or even if it will be allowed to resume. Germany's diplomacy reaches its limits in the Middle East. Deutsche Welle. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has expressed support for Israel while also calling for an easing of Israeli operations in Gaza. During a visit to the Middle East, Baerbock stated that Germany stands in solidarity with Israel against the blind terror that wants to wipe Israel from the map. However, she also criticized the high number of civilian casualties in Gaza and condemned the illegal actions of Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank. Baerbock's visit coincided with that of U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, highlighting the ongoing tensions in the region. The situation in the Middle East has escalated, with Israel assassinating a Hezbollah commander in Lebanon and Iran-backed Houthi rebels launching attacks on merchant ships in the Red Sea. The US and the UK have responded with airstrikes on Houthi rebel sites. Germany is likely to become involved in the US-led mission in the Red Sea to counter Houthi attacks. The German government's support for Israel has been criticized in the Arab media, with some accusing Germany of using it as a cover for anti-Arab and anti-Muslim racism. Tough choices for Israel in US's Middle East vision. BBC. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has delivered a new message to Israel in an effort to end the cycle of violence in the Middle East. Blinken stated that Arab leaders would support regional integration, including normalized relations with Israel, in exchange for an end to the Gaza war and Israel's acceptance of a clear path to Palestinian political rights and a unified Palestinian state. The plan would also have the additional benefit of isolating Iran and reducing its efforts to destabilize the region. Blinken acknowledged that adopting the American proposal would require hard choices on the part of Israel, but insisted that the promise of a durable regional peace was worth the effort. The U.S. strategy for the endgame of the Gaza war is to offer normalization and regional stability to Israel as a carrot, with no other carrots available. The stick is that if Israel does not make concessions to its Arab neighbors, it will be left dealing with the chaos and devastation it created in Gaza on its own. A wider war doesn't suit Iran, even as it benefits from rising tensions. CNN. Tensions between the U.S. and Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen are rising, and the risk of a regional conflict is growing. The US and UK have carried out a series of strikes on the Houthi fighters in an effort to force them to halt their attacks on ships in the Red Sea. Iran's network of armed groups has been activated across the region, with Hezbollah engaging with Israeli forces on the Lebanon-Israel border, and Iranian-backed forces in Iraq and Syria launching attacks on US military positions. Iran's proxies have gained popularity and support in the region as a result of their role in the conflict. However, a full-scale conflict would risk decimating these groups and would be unpopular with Iranians themselves. The Biden administration is seeking to balance the maneuverability of Israel without risking a regional war. As long as the war in Gaza continues, the Houthi attacks and other tensions will escalate. The U.S. needs to restore freedom of navigation and secure international trade in the Red Sea whilst attempting to avoid escalation into a full-scale war. UN warns Gaza is heading for famine as specter of wider war looms. New York Times. A senior UN official has warned of a horrific humanitarian crisis in Gaza that is hurtling towards famine. The crisis is due to Israel delaying or denying permission to humanitarian convoys, which is preventing the delivery of urgently needed aid. At the same time, the Houthi militia in Yemen, which is backed by Iran, has threatened to respond to American airstrikes. There is growing concern that both Yemen and Gaza are on the brink of a widening regional war, which will inevitably lead to even more suffering for civilians in these areas. Iran must tell Houthis to cease and desist, Shapps. BBC. UK Defence Secretary Grant Shapps has called on Iran to urge its proxies in the Middle East, including the Houthis in Yemen and Hezbollah in Lebanon, to cease and desist as the world is running out of patience. The UK joined the US in launching airstrikes against Houthi targets in Yemen after the group had been attacking shipping in the Red Sea since November. Shapps argued that the UK was acting in self-defense over the threat to container ships and an attack on a Royal Navy destroyer by a drone last month. Major shipping companies have ceased sailing in the region due to the increased threat. US launches second strike on Houthis in Yemen. BBC. The US has launched a second attack on Houthi militants in Yemen. The first attack involved the UK and US bombing nearly 30 Houthi positions. The U.S. Central Command said Saturday's attack targeted a Houthi radar site using Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles, and was designed to degrade the Houthis' ability to attack maritime vessels. The Houthis responded by saying there would be a strong and effective response to the strikes, but stated that there were no injuries. There have been a series of Houthi attacks on shipping vessels in the Red Sea in recent weeks. Why are Britain and U.S. attacking Yemen's Iran-backed Houthi rebels? The Independent. The US and the UK have carried out military strikes against targets linked to the Houthis in Yemen. The attacks were launched in response to the Houthi rebels' largest attack on Red Sea shipping, which was one of 27 such assaults since November 19. The strikes targeted Houthi locations in the Yemen capital Sana'a, the Red Sea port of Hodeidah, Dammar, and the group's stronghold of Sada. The US said it carried out strikes at more than 60 targets at 16 Houthi locations, including radar systems, drone and missile storage and launch sites, and command centers. The UK identified key facilities involved in Houthi targeting of its vessels and agreed to a coordinated strike to reduce the Houthis' capability. The US used Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles, while the UK sent 4 RAF Typhoons carrying Paveway 4 guided bombs. The Red Sea is a major waterway for global trade, with around 12 to 15% of shipping traffic passing through it. Shipping companies have been forced to reroute vessels, causing delays in supply chains and increased insurance costs. Israel-Hamas, Lebanese fear war amid de-escalation attempts. Deutsche Welle. The situation along the border between Lebanon and Israel is on the brink of escalation, with fears of war growing. Hezbollah militia, backed by Iran, has been exchanging fire with the Israeli Defense Forces, and many civilians have fled the region. There have been efforts by the US and Germany to de-escalate the situation, but they are unwilling to negotiate directly with Hezbollah, which is considered a terrorist group. There are concerns that Hezbollah is following its own strategic interests, rather than those of Lebanon, and that it is part of a wider regional coalition with Iran and other actors. Israel's People's Army at war. Foreign policy. This article discusses the unique nature of the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, and its approach to warfare in comparison to the US military. The IDF is a draft military, designed to reflect Israeli society and act as a unifying force. The relationship between Israelis and the IDF is deeply ingrained in the nation's culture, with military funerals broadcast on live television and a moment of silence observed on Memorial Day. However, the IDF's failure to protect the Israeli public during a recent attack by Hamas has shaken Israelis' trust in the military and highlighted the need to restore that trust. The article also highlights the differences between the IDF and the US military. The IDF relies heavily on reservists, who may have been out of uniform for a while, which reinforces Israel's bias for quick action and a preference for short-term solutions. In contrast, the US military has a more methodical approach and builds in guardrails against overeagerness through its non-commissioned officer corps. The IDF also lacks the same soldier discipline as the US military, which can lead to problems during combat and when transitioning to a reconstruction phase. The author argues that the US should recognize and understand the unique nature of the IDF and its approach to warfare. The US may want Israel to fight like it did in Iraq, but Israel sees its war as an existential struggle and views the conflict as more akin to World War II. The author suggests that the US should help the IDF win the peace that follows the conflict by assisting in the development of a new force that can address the long-term challenges with the Palestinians. Ladies and gentlemen, 6 Doctor here, your resident observer from the 6 Degrees world. Today, we have a mix of news from the Middle East, with stories ranging from the Palestine national football team's struggles amidst the war in Gaza, to Germany's diplomatic efforts in the region, to the escalating tensions between the US and Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen. Let's dive in and take a closer look. Starting with the Palestine national football team, their preparations for the Asian Cup campaign have been overshadowed by the war in Gaza. The team has been unable to return to the West Bank due to Israeli forces' movement restrictions, leaving them with a constant feeling of anxiety for their families. It's a challenging situation for the players, who are not only focused on their sporting goals but also deeply affected by the conflict. Moving on to Germany's diplomacy in the Middle East, Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock expressed support for Israel while also calling for an easing of Israeli operations in Gaza. Germany's stance has been criticized in the Arab media, with accusations of using support for Israel as a cover for anti-Arab and anti-Muslim racism. It's a delicate balancing act for Germany, as they navigate the complexities of the region and try to promote peace. Next, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken delivered a new message to Israel, offering regional integration and normalized relations with Arab leaders in exchange for an end to the Gaza war and Israel's acceptance of a clear path to Palestinian political rights. The U.S. strategy is to offer normalization and regional stability as a carrot, with the stick being the chaos and devastation that Israel would have to deal with if it doesn't make concessions. It's a tough ask for Israel, but the promise of a durable regional peace may be worth the effort. In Yemen, tensions between the U.S. and Iran-backed Houthi rebels are rising, with the risk of a wider regional conflict growing. The US and UK have carried out strikes on the Houthi fighters in an effort to force them to halt their attacks on ships in the Red Sea. Iran's proxies across the region have been activated, engaging with Israeli forces and launching attacks on US military positions. The Biden administration is seeking to balance the situation, but as long as the war in Gaza continues, tensions will escalate. Restoring freedom of navigation and securing international trade in the Red Sea is crucial, but avoiding a full-scale war is equally important. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is reaching horrific levels, with UN officials warning of famine and Israel delaying or denying permission for aid delivery. At the same time, there are concerns that both Yemen and Gaza are on the brink of a wider regional war, which would only exacerbate the suffering of civilians. The world is running out of patience, and the UK has called on Iran to urge its proxies to cease their actions. Lastly, we have the unique nature of the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, and its approach to warfare. The IDF is deeply ingrained in Israeli society and acts as a unifying force, but recent events have shaken Israelis' trust in the military. The IDF has a different approach compared to the US military, relying heavily on reservists and lacking the same soldier discipline. Understanding this unique nature and assisting in the development of a new force that can address long-term challenges is crucial for the US. So there you have it, a glimpse into the complex and ever-changing landscape of the Middle East. It's a region filled with challenges and opportunities, where diplomacy, sports, and military actions intersect. As always, I'm eager to hear your thoughts. What do you make of these events? Do you have any questions or insights? Let's discuss. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6Do Brief via email.